The moment Darius Hartwell told Octavia Bennett she couldn't read, he signed his own death warrant. He just didn't know the woman holding the mop owned more of his company than he did. This is a story about two people living in the same city, breathing the same air, but existing in completely different universes. Darius Hartwell woke up every morning on the 42nd floor of Manhattan's financial district, where the sunrise looked like liquid gold pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 36, he was everything America told you to worship. Sharp jawline, Italian suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the kind of confidence that came from never, not once in his entire life, hearing the word no. His corner office wasn't just a workspace. It was a throne room. And Darius wore his crown like he was born for it, because he was third-generation wealth. Country clubs where memberships were inherited, not earned. Yacht parties where the champagne cost more per bottle than a week's groceries. This was his birthright, his legacy, his entire identity wrapped up in a last name that opened every door before he even had to knock. But 30 miles across that same city, in a modest apartment complex where neighbors actually knew each other's names, where the smell of home-cooked meals drifted through thin walls and kids played in hallways, lived Octavia Bennett. 5 a.m. every single morning. That's when Octavia's day began. Had been beginning that way for 8 years. At 33, she moved through her studio apartment with the kind of efficiency that comes from making every second count. Because when you're building something from nothing, you don't have seconds to waste. Her space was small but immaculate. Photographs of the grandmother who raised her watching over everything, books stacked on every surface like soldiers standing guard, and a small desk where she spent her evenings hunched over a laptop, hunting for opportunities in places other people were too blind or too privileged to see. See, Octavia's story didn't start with silver spoons and trust funds. It started on the South Side, raised by Miss Lorraine, a woman who cleaned houses for wealthy families her entire life and came home every evening with stories. Stories about dignity, about respect, about seeing people for who they truly were, not what they appeared to be. "Baby girl," Miss Lorraine used to say, her hands worn smooth from decades of other people's dirt. "The measure of a person isn't in their bank account. It's in how they treat people who can't do anything for them." Those words became Octavia's compass. Her North Star, the thing she measured everything against. She'd clawed her way through community college while juggling 3 jobs, earning her business degree 1 credit at a time, 1 sacrifice at a time. But life doesn't care about your degree when you're a black woman knocking on doors that were never built to open for you. When her grandmother got sick, when the medical bills started piling up like unpaid sins, when the recession hit and opportunities dried up faster than rain in a drought, Octavia made a choice. She put on the uniform. She picked up the mop. She became invisible. But here's the thing about being invisible. Here's what Darius Hartwell and people like him never understood. When you're invisible, you see everything. For 3 months, Octavia had been cleaning the executive floor of Hartwell Industries. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The overnight shift. Fewer people around. Less small talk. More time to think. More time to observe. She'd move through those gleaming offices like a ghost, pushing her cart, emptying trash cans, wiping down surfaces that were already clean. Just another faceless worker in a uniform that might as well have been an invisibility cloak. Except Octavia Bennett had a secret so big, so improbable, that if you told it to anyone, they'd laugh you out of the room. Years ago, when she was still piecing together her education between shifts at 3 different jobs, Octavia discovered she had a gift. Not just intelligence, though God knows she had that in spades, but something more. An intuition for markets, for investments, for seeing patterns where other people saw chaos, opportunities where other people saw risk. What started as curiosity became obsession. She read everything, studied everything, taught herself to think like the wealthy people her grandmother cleaned for, except smarter, hungrier, more disciplined. $10 here, 20 there. Amounts that seemed laughable to people like Darius Hartwell, but to Octavia, they were seeds, and she planted every single one. When the tech boom hit, she made moves that venture capitalists would have called reckless. When the market crashed and everyone panicked, she bought. Patiently, strategically, like a chess player who could see 20 moves ahead. 15 years of this. 15 years of sacrifice and discipline and brilliant, almost supernatural intuition. And it built something remarkable, something nobody suspected. Through a network of holding companies and trusts, structures she'd learned to build to protect her privacy, to avoid the questions and the doubt and the disbelief that always came when a black woman had wealth. She'd become one of the largest shareholders in a struggling but promising company. That company? Hartwell Industries. 18%. She owned 18%. More than Darius Hartwell himself. The board knew her only as O. Bennett Trust. A name on quarterly reports. A line item in shareholder meetings. They had no idea that their mysterious major investor was emptying their trash cans at 2 in the morning. It was a Tuesday evening when the mask started to crack. Octavia had just begun her shift, cleaning the conference room where Darius had spent his day in meetings, when she heard the elevator chime. She didn't look up. Didn't need to. She'd learned the sound of expensive shoes on marble floors. The particular rhythm of entitlement. Darius stormed in, tie loosened, fury radiating off him like heat. He was on his phone, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. I don't care what the report says, Morrison. We need those numbers up by next quarter or heads will roll. Yes, including yours. He ended the call, threw himself into his chair, and for a full 30 seconds, didn't even acknowledge that Octavia existed. She'd seen him before, of course. Watched him from her invisible position as he commanded rooms, dismissed suggestions, treated everyone around him like chess pieces to be moved at his convenience. Handsome? Absolutely. The kind of looks that opened doors and turned heads. But Octavia had learned something her grandmother taught her. Beauty without substance is just an attractive shell. You missed a spot. His voice cut through the silence. He wasn't even looking at her, just staring at his phone. Octavia glanced at the conference table. It gleamed like glass, spotless. I'm sorry. There. The table. The streaky. Do it again. She looked at the surface that she'd just cleaned to perfection. Sir, did I ask for an explanation? Now his eyes met hers. Cold. Dismissive. The kind of look you give to a malfunctioning appliance. Just do your job. That's what you're paid for. Something flickered in Octavia's chest. But she kept her face neutral. Professional. Of course. She wiped the table again, knowing it didn't need it, feeling his eyes on her like a judgment she hadn't asked for. Over the next weeks, it became a pattern, a ritual of cruelty. He'd complain about microscopic imperfections, criticize her work, speak to her as if she were less than human. And each time, Octavia remained professional, her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind about dignity and grace. But she was also learning everything she needed to know about Darius Hartwell, about the man who helped run the company she'd invested her fortune in. And what she learned disappointed her more than she could have imagined. The confrontation happened on a Friday evening. Darius had stayed late, preparing for a crucial board meeting. Octavia was cleaning his office when he returned from the break room, coffee in hand, irritation written across his face like a headline. Seriously, he gestured at his desk. You moved my papers. I moved them to dust, sir. They're in the same order. I don't care. I had them exactly where I wanted them. Do you have any idea how important these documents are? He laughed, and the sound was cruel. Cutting. Of course you don't. You probably can't even read half the words in them. The insult hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Octavia's hand tightened on her cleaning cloth. I can read just fine, Mr. Hartwell. Oh, really? Let me guess. You got your GED and think that makes you educated? Here's some advice, sweetheart. Stay in your lane. Some of us worked hard to get where we are. We went to real schools, earned real degrees. You push 'em up. That's your ceiling. Don't get ideas above your station. And that's when something inside Octavia Bennett, something that had been building for 3 months, for 8 years, for her entire life, finally broke free. You think you worked hard? The words escaped before she could stop them, and she didn't want to stop them. You think inheriting a company from your daddy makes you special? Darius's eyes widened. In his entire privileged life, no one had ever spoken to him this way. "Excuse me? You heard me." Octavia set down her supplies, stood straight, looked him dead in the eye. "You were born on third base and think you hit a triple. Everything you have was handed to you. I've seen your quarterly reports, Mr. Hartwell. I know exactly how this company runs. And it's not because of your brilliant leadership. How dare you? How dare I? How dare you?" Her voice was steady, fierce, years of silence turning into thunder. "You talk about hard work? I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college. I studied business while you were probably partying at whatever Ivy League school your daddy bought your way into. I built something from nothing while you were coasting on a legacy you did nothing to earn." Darius's face went red. His jaw clenched. "You're fired. Get out. Now." Octavia smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Gladly. She began removing her cleaning uniform, revealing the professional blouse underneath. "And you can explain to your board on Monday why you fired one of your largest shareholders." The color drained from Darius Hartwell's face like someone pulled a plug. "What?" "Oh, Bennett Trust." She pulled out her phone, showed him the screen, showed him the proof of everything he'd been too blind to see. "That's me. I own 18% of this company, Mr. Hartwell." She paused. Let it sink in. Let him feel the ground disappear beneath his expensive Italian shoes. "Which means I own more of Hartwell Industries than you do. So here's the question I'll leave you with. What happens when the person you've been treating like they're beneath you turns out to be the one holding your entire future in their hands?" The silence in that office lasted exactly 7 seconds. 7 seconds where Darius Hartwell's entire world collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. But what happened next? That's where this story stops being about revenge and starts being about something far more dangerous. Something neither of them saw coming. That's impossible." Darius's voice came out strangled, like someone was choking him with his own expensive tie. Octavia stood there, phone in hand, watching him process information his brain refused to accept. She could see it happening in real time, the denial, the confusion, the desperate scrambling for an explanation that would make his world make sense again. But there was no explanation, just the cold, hard truth displayed on her screen. Real-time portfolio data. Her name, her holdings, everything verified, everything real. "I've been investing since I was 18 years old," she said quietly, and her voice had changed. No more deference. No more making herself smaller. "Every dollar I could save, I put to work. I studied this industry, learned it inside and out. When your company needed capital 6 months ago, I saw potential. Not because of you, Darius. Despite you." He sank into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. For the first time in his privileged life, Darius Hartwell had no power, no control, no script to follow. "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "Why work as a cleaner if you're—" He couldn't even say it. Couldn't make his mouth form the word that would shatter everything he thought he knew about the world. "Rich." Octavia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. No victory. Just a sad kind of knowing. "You can say it. Because wealth doesn't define who I am. My grandmother cleaned houses her whole life and she was worth 10 of you. Because I wanted to see the truth of this company. And you don't see truth from a boardroom. You see it at night when people think no one's watching. When people reveal who they really are." Darius looked up at her, and for the first time really looked. Saw past the uniform he'd already mentally discarded. "And what did you see?" The question hung between them like a challenge, like a confession. "I saw a man who mistakes cruelty for strength, who confuses fear with respect, who's so insulated by privilege that he's forgotten, or maybe never learned, how to treat people with basic human decency." Each word landed like a physical blow. Darius's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Couldn't interrupt. Because somewhere deep down, past the ego and the entitlement and the armor he'd spent 36 years building, he knew she was right. "If you own so much of the company," he finally managed, "why haven't you come to board meetings? Made your voice heard?" "I have, through proxies. But I realized something tonight. Octavia picked up her bag, preparing to leave. It's not enough to invest money. If I care about where this company goes, I need to step out of the shadows. Starting Monday, I'll be attending that board meeting in person, and we're going to have a serious conversation about the direction of Hartwell Industries and who should be leading it. She walked toward the door, then paused, turned back. You should get some sleep, Mr. Hartwell. Monday's going to be a very long day. And then she was gone, leaving Darius alone in his corner office that suddenly felt less like a throne room and more like a prison. That Friday night, Darius Hartwell didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse apartment, $12 million of marble and glass and emptiness, staring at the city lights below, replaying every interaction with Octavia like his mind was stuck in a loop he couldn't escape. Every dismissive comment, every cruel assumption, every moment he'd treated her as less than human. They played on repeat, except now he wasn't watching them from his perspective. Now he was seeing them through her eyes. The woman who'd built an empire from nothing while he'd simply inherited one. The woman who understood markets better than anyone on his executive team while he'd been coasting on his father's reputation and other people's work. His phone buzzed. Again and again. Texts from friends about weekend plans. Marcus wanted to hit the club. Jennifer was having a gallery opening. Someone named Tiffany, he couldn't even remember her last name, was throwing a yacht party. The social calendar of Manhattan's elite, the world he'd always known, the life he'd never questioned. But for the first time, sitting there alone in all that expensive emptiness, it felt hollow, like a beautiful painting with nothing underneath. Like his entire life had been performance art, and he'd forgotten there was supposed to be substance beneath the show. He pulled up information on O. Bennett Trust, started digging, and what he found didn't just humble him, it shattered him. Investment after investment, each one more brilliant than the last. This wasn't luck. This wasn't even talent. This was genius-level market understanding combined with discipline that bordered on superhuman. She'd predicted the tech boom before the tech bros knew it was coming. She'd bought during the crash when everyone else was selling their souls to get out. She'd built positions in companies that seemed worthless and watched them become gold mines. Everything he'd claimed to value in business: vision, discipline, risk assessment, strategic thinking. She embodied it all. And he'd told her she probably couldn't read. The shame hit him like a physical thing, made him sick to his stomach, made him want to punch the walls of his expensive prison. But across the city, in a world Darius had never truly seen, Octavia was having a different kind of weekend. She sat in her small apartment, surrounded by sounds he'd never experienced. Mrs. Chun next door cooking dinner, the smell drifting through the walls. The Martinez kids playing in the hallway, their laughter like music. Mr. Johnson's old jazz records playing one floor down. This was community, real community. The kind you couldn't buy, couldn't inherit, could only earn by showing up, by caring, by being present. Saturday morning, she attended service at the church she'd been going to since she was a girl. Sat in the same pew where her grandmother used to sit, surrounded by people who'd known her when she had nothing, who loved her not for what she'd accumulated but for who she'd remained. Sunday afternoon, she visited the grave where Miss Lorraine rested. I lost my temper, she whispered, kneeling by the headstone, her fingers tracing the letters of her grandmother's name. I know you taught me better than that. You always said to take the high road, to respond to cruelty with grace. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and Octavia could almost hear her grandmother's voice, could almost feel those worn, gentle hands on her shoulders. But maybe, she continued, maybe there's a time for grace and a time for truth. Maybe sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is hold up a mirror and make them see themselves clearly, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts. She sat there for a long time, talking to the woman who'd shaped her, who'd given her the compass she still navigated by. And somewhere in that quiet conversation with the past, Octavia made peace with what she'd done, with what came next, because Monday was coming, and Monday was going to change everything. 9 a.m., Monday morning, Octavia Bennett walked through the main entrance of Hartwell Industries. Not the service entrance she'd been using for 3 months. the main lobby, where executives and power players and people who mattered came through. She wore a tailored navy suit that fit her like it was custom-made because it was. Her natural hair was styled in elegant locks that cascaded down her shoulders. She carried a leather portfolio that cost more than some people's monthly salary. And when she walked like she owned the place. Because she did. 18% of it, anyway. The receptionist's eyes went wide. You could see the recognition struggling with confusion, the mental gymnastics of reconciling the woman in the cleaning uniform with the woman standing in front of her now. But Octavia just smiled, professional and calm, and headed to the executive elevator. The boardroom fell silent when she entered. 12 people sat around that long mahogany table, and every single one of them turned to stare. Some with curiosity, some with confusion, and Darius, sitting at the head of the table like always, with something in his eyes that looked almost like shame. "Good morning," Octavia said, her voice clear and confident, filling the room like she'd been doing this her entire life. "I'm Octavia Bennett, representing O. Bennett Trust. I believe we have a quarterly review to discuss." What happened next would become legendary in corporate circles. The kind of story that gets told in MBA programs as a case study in disruption, in challenging the status quo, in what happens when someone with real vision stops playing it safe. Octavia presented her analysis with surgical precision. She'd spent 3 months watching this company from the inside, seeing things that quarterly reports never captured. She identified inefficiencies that were bleeding millions, proposed innovations that the executive team had been too cautious or too comfortable to consider, challenged assumptions that had gone unquestioned for years, not because they were right, but because no one had the courage or the insight to push back. But more than numbers, more than profit margins and market share, she raised something that made everyone in that room shift uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. Company culture. "I've read your mission statement," she said, her eyes moving around the table, landing on each person, making them see her, really see her. "It talks about integrity, respect, valuing every member of the Hartwell family." Beautiful words. "But I've also walked your halls at night. I've talked to your cleaning staff, your security guards, the people who keep this building running while you're home in your comfortable beds. And the gap between what you say you value and how you actually treat people is not a gap. It's a canyon." The silence in that room was deafening. "Your turnover rate among lower-level employees is 43%. You know what that costs you? Not just in recruiting and training, but in institutional knowledge, in loyalty, in the foundation that holds this entire enterprise together. You can't build a sustainable company on the backs of people you treat as disposable." She pulled up slides showing the correlation between employee satisfaction and performance metrics. Showed them data they'd never bothered to look at because it involved people they'd never bothered to see. And through it all, Darius sat quietly. The man who usually dominated every meeting, who interrupted and overruled and made sure everyone knew he was in charge, just listened. His usual dominance replaced by something that looked almost like humility. When the meeting ended, when the other board members filed out still processing what had just happened, Darius approached her. His movements were careful, like he was approaching something fragile, something he was afraid might disappear. "Can we talk?" he asked, and his voice was different, stripped of arrogance. "Please." They sat in his office, the same space where he'd insulted her just 3 days before. But the power dynamic had shifted so completely that it might as well have been a different room, a different universe. "I owe you an apology," Darius began, and the words seemed to cost him something. "More than one. Everything I said to you, every assumption I made, every time I treated you as less than human. There's no excuse for it." "No," Octavia agreed simply. "There isn't." He winced but nodded. "I've been thinking all weekend about how I was raised, about what I was taught to value, about who I've become." He looked at her directly, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "I don't like what I see. The thing is, Mr. Hartwell, Darius, please." She paused, studied him, seeing past the handsome exterior, past the expensive suit, past all the armor he wore, to something more real underneath. The thing is, Darius, you're not stupid. You could be a good leader if you actually led instead of just commanded. But you've spent so long playing a role, living up to some image of what you thought you were supposed to be, that you forgot there were real people on the other side of your decisions. How do I change that? The question was genuine, almost desperate. Do you actually want to? Or are you just scared I'll vote you out? The question hung between them like a truth serum, demanding honesty he'd never been forced to give. Darius was quiet for a long moment. She could see him wrestling with it, with his ego and his fear and something else. Something that might have been the first spark of genuine self-awareness he'd ever experienced. Both, he finally admitted, and the honesty of it surprised them both. I'm terrified you'll take everything I've known away. This company, this position, it's all I've ever had. It's my whole identity. Without it, I don't know who I am. He paused, his voice dropping. But I've been miserable, Octavia. I didn't even realize it until you held up a mirror. I've been playing a part for so long that I forgot it was supposed to be a performance. I thought that's just who I was, who I had to be. And there it was, the crack in the armor. The first real, honest thing Darius Hartwell might have ever said. Octavia felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. It was too soon for that, and he hadn't earned it yet. But something else. Recognition, maybe, of the possibility that people could change. That beneath the cruelty and the entitlement, there might be someone worth knowing. Change doesn't happen in a conversation, she said carefully. It happens in choices, daily choices, when no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain from being decent except being able to look at yourself in the mirror. Will you help me? Darius asked, and the vulnerability in the question was almost painful. I know I don't deserve it. I know I've given you every reason to want to destroy me, but I'm asking anyway. Will you help me become someone better than who I've been? It was a dangerous question, the kind that could lead to complications neither of them were prepared for. But Octavia thought about her grandmother, about the lessons she'd learned about redemption and second chances, about how the measure of a person wasn't their worst moment, but what they did after. I'll make you a deal, she said slowly. I'll give you 3 months. We'll meet regularly. You'll implement real changes, not performative ones. You'll learn people's names. You'll listen more than you talk. You'll actually see the people who work for you as human beings who matter. And at the end of 3 months, I'll decide whether you're serious about this or whether it's time to restructure leadership. And if I fail, then you fail, and you deal with the consequences. She stood, prepared to leave. But I don't think you will. You know why? Why? Because for the first time in your life, Darius Hartwell, you actually want something you can't buy, can't inherit, and can't charm your way into. You want to be someone worth respecting. And that's actually worth fighting for. What began as a confrontation became something neither of them anticipated. Over the following weeks, Octavia and Darius started meeting regularly. At first, it was purely professional strategy sessions about the company, discussions about market positioning, reviews of departmental performance. But somewhere between the spreadsheets and the quarterly projections, something else started happening. Coffee before board meetings turned into lunches that stretched past their scheduled time. Conversations about business strategies evolved into discussions about their lives, their fears, their dreams for what they wanted to build. Darius started showing up differently, not just in the office but in himself. He learned the name of every person on the executive floor, then every floor below that. He visited departments he'd never even thought about, asking questions not to test people but to actually understand what they did, what they needed, what challenges they faced. One afternoon, Octavia watched him spend 45 minutes talking to Jamal, a young man from the mailroom who had ideas about improving internal communication systems. The old Darius would have dismissed him without a second thought. This Darius listened, took notes, actually implemented the suggestions. You're learning, Octavia said that evening, when they were reviewing the week's progress. I had a good teacher. Darius smiled, and it was different from his usual confident smirk. Softer, more genuine. But it's harder than I thought it would be. Unlearning 36 years of conditioning. The hard things are usually the important things. They were sitting in his office, the city lights glittering below them like scattered diamonds. Octavia had her laptop open, showing him data on employee satisfaction metrics that had started trending upward for the first time in 5 years. "Can I ask you something?" Darius said suddenly. "You're going to anyway." He laughed, a real laugh this time. "Fair. Why are you doing this? Really? You could have just voted me out, restructured leadership, walked away. Why invest the time in trying to help me change?" Octavia was quiet for a moment, considering. "My grandmother used to say that the hardest work we do isn't changing circumstances. It's changing people's hearts, including our own." She looked at him directly. "I could replace you with someone competent. But competence without character is just efficient cruelty. I'd rather help you build both. If you're willing." "I'm willing," Darius said, and the certainty in his voice surprised them both. As weeks turned into months, something else started happening. Something neither of them acknowledged but both of them felt. The professional respect was deepening into something more personal, more complicated. Darius found himself thinking about her at odd hours. Not about her investment strategies or her business acumen, but about the way she laughed when something genuinely amused her. The way she talked about her grandmother with a love so pure it made his chest ache. The way she moved through the world with a confidence that didn't come from money or position, but from knowing exactly who she was and refusing to be less than that for anyone. And Octavia, despite her better judgment, found herself seeing past the man he'd been to the man he was becoming. The vulnerability he was learning to show. The genuine effort he was making to change. The way he listened now, really listened when people spoke. The way he'd started using his privilege not as a shield but as a tool to help others. It was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous. Mixing business with personal feelings was a disaster waiting to happen. But somewhere between the coffee meetings and the late-night strategy sessions, between watching him grow and being part of that growth, something had shifted. One evening, after a particularly challenging board meeting where they defended an employee against unjust criticism from one of the old guard members, they stood together in his office, the adrenaline still coursing through them. "We did it," Darius said, and there was genuine joy in his voice. "Did you see Jenkins's face when you shut down his argument?" "We made a good team today," Octavia admitted, smiling. "We make a good team every day." Their eyes met, and suddenly the air in the room felt different, charged, like lightning about to strike. Darius took a step closer. "Octavia, Her phone buzzed, a reminder about a meeting. The moment broke, and she stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself. "I should go," she said quickly. "Early morning tomorrow, right?" "Of course." But the look in his eyes said everything his mouth didn't. As she left that evening, Octavia knew they were standing on the edge of something. A cliff they could step back from or jump off together. And the scariest part? She wasn't sure which option terrified her more. So here's what I want you to think about. What happens when the person you set out to change ends up changing you just as much? When professional respect becomes personal connection. When the walls you built to protect yourself start feeling less like safety and more like a prison. And what happens when two people from completely different worlds discover that maybe, just maybe, the distance between them isn't as wide as they thought? Because that's the dangerous thing about transformation. It never affects just one person, and it never stops where you think it will. The real test of transformation doesn't come in grand gestures or dramatic moments. It comes in the quiet choices you make when nobody's keeping score. And for Darius Hartwell and Octavia Bennett, that test was about to arrive in ways neither of them expected. But would the change be enough? Would it be real? Or would old patterns pull them back to who they used to be? 6 months after that Friday night confrontation that changed everything, Octavia and Darius stood together before the company's expanded leadership team. The conference room was packed. Not just with executives, but with department heads, team leaders, people from every level of the organization. This was different from the old Hartwell Industries. This was something new being born. "We're here to announce a new initiative," Octavia said, her voice clear and strong, reaching every corner of that room. "The Lorraine Bennett Scholarship Fund, named after my grandmother. It will provide full educational support, tuition, books, living expenses, for employees and their families seeking higher education. Because potential doesn't care about your bank account, and neither should opportunity. The room erupted in applause, but Octavia wasn't finished. And Darius stepped forward, his voice carrying a conviction that 6 months ago would have been impossible. The Hartwell Second Chance program. Because everyone deserves the opportunity to prove themselves based on their abilities, not their circumstances. We'll be partnering with community colleges and workforce development programs to create pathways into careers at Hartwell Industries for people who've been overlooked, underestimated, or never given a fair shot. More applause. But this time it was different. This wasn't polite corporate clapping. This was genuine, emotional. People standing, some with tears in their eyes because they recognized something revolutionary. A company that was actually trying to see them as human beings, not just human resources. After the presentation, as people filed out still buzzing with excitement and possibility, Octavia and Darius walked together through the building. And if you'd been watching closely, you would have noticed something remarkable. Employees didn't shrink away from Darius anymore. They greeted him by name, shared ideas, laughed at his jokes. Not because they had to, but because the culture had fundamentally shifted from fear to collaboration, from hierarchy to respect. "You know what I think about now?" Darius said as they stepped into the elevator, alone for the first time all day. "What's that?" "That moment when I told you to stay in your lane. How close I came to missing out on knowing you. On becoming this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing everything, the transformed company, his transformed self. "I was standing on the edge of something beautiful, and I almost threw it away because I was too blind to see it." Octavia smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep satisfaction, from knowing that the hard work had been worth it. "And I think about what my grandmother used to say, that the measure of a person isn't in their bank account, but in how they treat people who can't do anything for them. I'm still trying to live up to that standard. We both are." She paused, then added quietly, "That's the point, Darius. We're supposed to keep trying, keep growing. The moment we think we've arrived is the moment we stop becoming better." The elevator doors opened, and they walked out into the lobby together. Not employer and employee, not even just business partners, but something more. Something that had been building for 6 months through late nights and early mornings, through challenges overcome and walls broken down, through the terrifying and beautiful process of two people learning to really see each other. Their relationship had evolved naturally, inevitably, like water finding its way downhill. Professional respect had deepened into genuine friendship. Friendship had given way to something neither of them could deny anymore. Late-night strategy sessions had transformed into quiet dinners at her apartment, where she'd cook recipes her grandmother had taught her, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. Formal business events became opportunities to steal moments together, sharing looks across crowded rooms that said more than words ever could. The first time he kissed her, it was after a particularly challenging board meeting where they defended a young employee against criticism from one of the old guard members. They'd won the argument, saved the employee's position, proven that merit mattered more than connections. The adrenaline and emotion had been running high, and in the privacy of his office, it finally overcame them both. "I love you," Darius whispered against her lips, his hands gentle on her face like he was holding something precious, irreplaceable. "I know I don't deserve you, but I love you." Octavia pulled back slightly, looking at him with those eyes that had always seen through him, past his defenses to the truth underneath. "You're right. You don't deserve me. Not because you're not good enough, but because no one deserves another person. Love isn't about deserving. We choose each other. We work for each other. We grow together. That's what makes it real." "Then let me choose you," he said, his voice raw with an honesty he'd never been capable of before. "Let me work for us. Let me grow with you for the rest of my life." "Darius Hartwell," she smiled, her eyes bright with emotion. "I thought you'd never ask." A year later, Darius proposed. Not in some expensive restaurant with a string quartet and champagne that cost more than monthly rent. He proposed in the staff break room at 2 in the morning, the same break room where cleaning crews gathered during their shifts. He'd brought her there deliberately, a symbolic gesture honoring how they'd met, acknowledging the journey they'd both traveled. "This is where I should have seen you," he said, down on one knee, holding a ring he'd chosen himself without any help from personal shoppers or jewelry consultants. "This is where you were all along, and I was too blind, too arrogant, too wrapped up in myself to notice. You changed my life, Octavia Bennett. You changed me, and I want to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift." She said yes. Of course she said yes, because transformation, real transformation, is irresistible. And watching someone become the best version of themselves, helping them get there, building something beautiful together from the wreckage of who you used to be, that's a kind of magic you don't walk away from. 3 years after that Friday night confrontation that started everything, Octavia and Darius stood before a different kind of audience. Students at a community college business program, young people with dreams and doubts, hope and fear written on their faces in equal measure. People who looked like Octavia, who came from neighborhoods like the one she'd grown up in. People who needed to hear that their circumstances didn't define their ceiling. "Our story isn't really about rags to riches," Octavia told them, her hand unconsciously finding Darius's, their fingers intertwining with the easy comfort of people who'd learned to move as one. "It's not even about enemies to lovers, though that makes for a better movie plot. It's about seeing people," Darius continued, his voice carrying the hard-earned wisdom of someone who'd learned this lesson the most painful way possible. "Really seeing them. I assumed I knew everything because I had wealth and a title. I was wrong about almost everything that mattered. The person I dismissed as beneath me turned out to be the one who saved me from myself." A young woman in the front row raised her hand, her voice tentative but brave. "What would you say is the most important lesson from your experience?" Octavia and Darius looked at each other, a whole conversation happening in that glance. Memories of where they'd been, gratitude for where they were, excitement for where they were going. Then they turned back to the students and answered together, their voices blending like they'd rehearsed it, though they hadn't. "That your worth isn't determined by how others see you, but by who you choose to be when no one important is watching. And that everyone is important, whether they're in the boardroom or cleaning it. The measure of character is found in how we treat people who can do nothing for us, because true success isn't about what you accumulate, but about who you become and who you lift up along the way." As they left that campus, walking hand in hand toward their car, toward their shared life, toward whatever came next, they carried the same truth. That the greatest investment either of them had ever made wasn't in stocks or companies or quarterly returns. It was in opening their hearts to see beyond surfaces, beyond assumptions, beyond the walls that society builds between people. Because in the end, love, like respect, like dignity, like human worth, can't be bought or inherited or accumulated in a portfolio. It can only be earned through the daily choice to see others truly, to value them completely, and to recognize that every person you meet has a story worth hearing, a dignity worth honoring, and a potential worth nurturing. So here's what I want to know from you. Who in your life have you been treating as invisible? Who have you dismissed because of their position, their appearance, or your assumptions about who they are? Because here's the truth that Darius learned the hard way. The person you're overlooking might be the one who changes your life. The person you're dismissing might be the one holding the key to your transformation. And the measure of who you really are isn't found in how you treat people who can elevate you, but in how you treat people who can't do anything for you at all. Drop a comment below and tell me, what assumptions have you made about someone that turned out to be completely wrong? Or tell me about a time when someone underestimated you and how you proved them wrong. I read every single comment, and I want to hear your story, because everybody has one, and every story matters. If the story moved you, if it made you think differently, if it reminded you that people can change and that transformation is always possible, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel because we're building a community here of people who believe in seeing the best in others and becoming the best in ourselves. Remember, the person you're about to overlook might be exactly the person you need to meet. Don't let your assumptions cost you what Darius almost lost. See people. Really see them. Because that's where the magic happens.